Okay, so I'm going to talk about response to big earthquakes and how Indonesia in 2004 pretty much changed everything for NEIC and the USGS and changed things for the University Utah seismograph stations. I'll if I can get to the first slide correctly. No. Ugh.
Just need your arrow on the screen.
Oh, I got to go down there. Okay.
Just right.
Oh my God. Where did it go?
Just somewhere.
We may never get through this stuff.
You just click on the.
Oh, okay, there. So I'm going to start and talk about a little bit about what the National Earthquake Information Center. I was transferred from Menlo Park office to Golden in 1992 to take over this monitoring system or to start the transition. And so what is NEIC? It has three main missions. It monitors the globe 24/7, and it provides information in real time to aid organizations, U.S. government, and the general public and the academic community. It integrates the global seismonet, USGS-funded regional nets, and any publicly available network, foreign and domestic. And then I think what's most important, it's the backup to regional networks in the U.S. And it does both backup in case there's a problem with a network, and it does support following large earthquakes. It provides, just general support, and we can talk about that later. Now, if I touch that, does that work? So most of my working career was here in Golden, Colorado. It's just one of many networks. Here's the hazard map. You know, there's the classic California networks, Alaska Net, Hawaii, Pacific Northwest, and then there's two networks in the east. NEIC sits here. It collects no data. It does not maintain or operate any stations. It's solely dependent on all of the regional nets and ASL for the seismic data that it uses in real time. And so here shows the roughly 2,200 seismic stations that are integrated in real time. In Golden, I'd like to note that the vast majority of the stations are in the continental US, significant numbers in Alaska. We are the backup by agreement for the University of Chile seismic network. So we take all of their 65 stations, and occasionally they do a really good job, but occasionally they'll have problems and they will call us and say, you're in charge. We fill similar roles in Australia. Whoops, I don't know what happened there, but okay, it means I need to go faster. So NEIC from a response point of view is responsible for responding to 4 and larger, 3 and larger in the continental US, 4 and other domestic areas, Puerto Rico, and we do respond automatically, or we respond to all 5 and larger, which means that we have to have a location of magnitude within 20 minutes. That's not very fast, and I'll be talking about it. But in fact, Utah and others they will be much quicker than NEIC in the US. But if there is an issue, NEIC does its backup role. So this is our threshold for responding if no one's home and doing their job. Oh, okay. So to give you an idea how things have changed, in 1994, about the time I came to NEIC, it took about 120 minutes, 2 hours to get an earthquake location. In 2000, it was about 90 minutes. In 2004, an hour and a half. But I will come to talk a little bit about this following the Sumatra earthquake. I'll be honest with you, at 75 minutes, we had no clue what was going on. But as time's gone by, now in 2022, here's a key number, we on average respond to every magnitude 5 worldwide in 15 minutes. We have a location, a magnitude, and almost always a source mechanism. It's influenced by a lot of things, the way you process data and the number of stations. In 94, there were only about 50 broadband stations operating in real time. And of course, it's now, in 2005, at the time of this, near the Sumatra event, it was only about 250 broadbands available worldwide. And why is broadband important? Because if you're trying to model big magnitude 9, magnitude 8 earthquakes, a short period station will only give you a location. It cannot help you with any of the source modeling, the magnitude and the kinematics of rupture. And so we're very dependent on broadband seismology, to where now we only acquire, we have the capability in Golden to acquire, there's probably 10,000 broadbands available, but we only acquire about 2,200. There are countries like China that only allow access to 4 real-time stations, 3 in India. Most people are getting better, but it's taking time. Japan, with thousands, only allows access to 20. They're well distributed, they're amazing stations, but they just don't allow it. And why, I don't know. So how fast you go is a reflection of how much data you have, and also how you process. So I'm going to talk about how we process, why we process data the way we do, so you have an understanding. So we have to start in 2004. This was 12 minutes after origin time. These were the stations available. They were primarily Air Force run GTSN stations in Africa, USGS, GSN stations, and a few other stations that were contributing. So at 12 minutes, here was the location of the event. Here's where the P wave, it's not quite reached Europe. At 12 minutes, we already knew that we didn't know at the time, but northern Sumatra was already inundated by a tsunami. We had our short period alarms on these blue stations, which meant we saw high signal in a short period of time. So the alarms were going off at NEIC, and the green stations were starting to be used in location. Importantly, we thought it was its classic short period magnitude was 6.2. A broadband magnitude had it at 8.2. We were notified internally that something was happening, and at the same time, PTWC was said it thought it was 8.2, but there was no tsunami advisory at this time. I live about 6 blocks from work, so I went straight back to work. It was on Christmas night, and I was there about 15 minutes after the event, and it was a disaster. So we're at 12 minutes, we kind of knew things. I probably got there at 20 minutes after. At an hour and a half, we had a surface wave. There was enough slow moving surface waves that we could say we thought it was an 8.5. So we publicly released almost 2 hours after a location in northern Sumatra with a magnitude 8.5. There were aftershocks 1,000 kilometers away from this event. And our analysts were looking at me and yelling that the system doesn't work. And I'm looking at, I located, if you know, I think they're really good. But I have to tell you, I was very confused. I didn't know what that meant. So my instinct was, I didn't know how big it was, but I thought it was bigger than 8.5, but that was it. 6 hours later, the Harvard group came out with a CMT of 8.9, and that was more what we thought it might be, but at NEIC, we just had no idea. So, it was a major disaster. What data is available, we didn't have the ability to model these large earthquakes. So at the time, our website kind of looked something like this. We could provide some background seismotectonic information. We were doing pager stuff. We could do shake maps. So these are ground motion models put on onto the surface. And in this case, we use the magnitude for doing ground motion scaling, but then we could use the aftershocks to get some finiteness in it. But this was taking hours. The moment tensor, that came from Harvard some 6 hours later. So we were basically, we could do a location, we could provide some basic background information. The tectonic summary was handwritten by Kevin Furlong, who was a former student here, and myself for this earthquake. And that was about it. And so keep in mind this kind of basic information in 2004. And I'm at the end of the talk, I'll talk about Turkey, and we can see where we've gotten. So the things that we get tasked to do in those days was we always wanted earthquake location, hypocenter within an hour, magnitude, a mechanism, and then usually a slip model. In those kind of days, we might have been able to do a slip model in a day. Updated, we could do updated shake maps. Stress change modeling is becoming more and more important. It was something we could do back then, but we just didn't. And then, of course, if you see right here at about 1 week, you're starting to get reports of damage and loss. It was taking a week, and then modified probabilities. What's likely if aftershocks was something that really was in its infancy, and we might have something in about a month. After Sumatra happened, the earthquake program came to Ray Bulin and myself and sat us down in January and said, you're going to do all of this in 2 hours. That's it. And I go, okay, give us the money. And they go, well, there's no money. You just get to do it. And we were lucky because we got $8 million a year to develop pager, so our loss modeling software we own 24/7, and we started to develop our web pages. So we did get money. It came later, but I remember being utterly stressed out when they said you're going to do all of this in 2 hours. And okay, so that's the talk, and how we got there, and why do we do it? Because there's emergency response. News media, the public was getting more and more wired at the time. U.S. military exposure in this part of the world. Diego Garcia, a very important thing in the Indian Ocean. We've had earthquakes in Guam and elsewhere in Afghanistan, where we have big earthquakes. So U.S. military and personnel worldwide need to know, humanitarian aid agencies, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent. And importantly, the cat bond industry now uses our loss models for determining what bonds are going to be floated. So we're talking millions of dollars. These groups, rescue groups, now base whether they're wheels up or not, based on some of our modeling, because it's about $1 million to take off and then go home, to mobilize and demobilize. So they don't want to do it if they have to. And so it's been a real challenge to be able to do this. I think if I talked too long on that one. So I'm just going to cut to the chase now, like the recent Turkey earthquake in February. We now have pre-positioned tectonic summaries. I got tired of writing them at 2 in the morning, or calling Kevin Furlong to get up and do them. We do our earthquake locations. We do these on average every 15 minutes following earthquakes, and I'll show you some timelines. We have automatic procedures for doing moment tensors, and we're improving our ability to do finite fault. And something that's been contentious with the University of Utah Site Network is earthquake aftershock forecasting is coming. It's now automatic, I think, for 5 and larger in the US, and we do it upon government request worldwide. And I'll just briefly touch on that. And then over time, we've significantly improved our impact, economic loss, human casualty estimates, and now landslide potential. So this is the range of products that we're now doing. Okay, it's been 20 years, and you could argue, well, you guys are really slow in getting there, but these are complex problems, and it takes a lot of thought and care to do this. And I'm going to walk through how we've changed. So I'm just going to go through some of these. So this is seismotectonics. This was a recent Loyal Thailand 7.7 earthquake. We started an internship program in some of our early CERN were undergraduates from Penn State University, were students of Kem Furlong's, and I would have them come out and write 6 to 8 paragraphs for the summer on different things around the world. And so if you go to the next one, this is one from this part of the world, the eastern margin. So these are summaries that undergraduate geology students wrote, and then were edited by Gavin Hayes and Kevin Furlong and myself. And then we would get students to develop new maps content. So we went from having to write them after every earthquake to pre-positioning, because we all know that these earthquakes are not acts of God. They're inside of a seismotectonic frame, and they can be explained. And this was our first attempt at doing this. And so these are just some of the maps we're doing. This map style, curiously, I hired a biologist, artist, GIS person from the University of Colorado. She was in the arts program, in the geography program, and biology. She was a triple major. And I said, she came and I said, well, I just want new maps. And she goes, well, I'm going to stop working for you if they're red, blue, and green, like the old maps. And I go, well, I need you. And she goes, well, so this was the color things that she came up with. And she was really good. And these maps have been immensely popular. And it's gone so far as if you're online and getting bored, just type in Australia Plate USGS story map. And so now we've moved to a story map format to try and do this pre-positioned explaining the information. Everyone here, I recommend going and seeing these. These were done by Lauren Stearns, now a master's student at South Dakota School of Mines. She was an undergrad at Penn State. Kat Wood just graduated as a geology major from Penn State, and Kevin is a professor there and a former student here. And they did amazing things with this. And so you can, this is just the front page of them trying to set the framework. So we're moving away from fixed maps and text to some interactive stuff. So now we'll move on to earthquake source modeling. This has been a real problem for a long time. I'm always envious of these regional nets. They have wonderful networks, a small extent, and they just kill it on earthquakes. And these are, when you do it globally, and you maybe some days get data from the Australians, you sometimes get it from China, you almost never get it from India. It gets more problematic. The quality of data isn't always so good. Whoops. Can I go backwards? Oh, crap, I'm in trouble. Nope. So the way we do it, this is a horrible slide, I apologize. You grid the earth up into grids. You have stations somewhere in this gridded sphere. You have picks. No station knows about each other. So you have a pick at a station, and you essentially do a back propagation. You know when a pick arrives. You don't know if it's a P wave. You don't know if it's an S wave. You just know you have what you call an event. It's like a pick. And you back propagate it, and you do this continuously in tempo around the globe, looking for earthquakes with it. And you have a horribly heterogeneous net. So we went to a new system called Glass 3. It's just, you just have detections and it runs continuously. It's super complicated. There's essentially 5 people in the world that do this kind of work. So you just don't outsource it. You know, it's very difficult. to go fast, the detection nodes are only linked to the closest end stations, in our case about 14. And when a PIC is added, all the detection nodes connected will attempt to form a nucleator station. And then all of the hypocenters and PICs are shared. And so it's this complicated Rubik's Cube thing, you end up with a solution. I think to just show you, this is not particularly that good of a slide, but in the US, here's all the stations that at the time we did this, we used. They're the pink triangles. The grid is very fine. It's like a 1 kilometer grid here of the detection grids. And here's one node over here, and you can see the closest 14 stations. So if these stations have a PIC, all of the close nodes, you'll do a back propagation to the closest nodes. This guarantees you will go fast. You do have a problem if you're getting all of your stations from the University of Oklahoma and they go south and they're not sending you stations, you have to have a different strategy. So we have multiple grids, some that rely only on the GSM, some that rely on only the backbone, so that we have this multiple tiered system, so that if we have an outage from here, we have another way of getting a location. It's a complicated problem. But we're making progress. If you just take a PIC, you don't know if it's noise, you don't know if it's a P wave, you don't know if it's a really messy, ugly problem. But recently, we've been working on machine learning, where we now classify a PIC by distance. Is it a local PIC? We only broadly know this over, is it within roughly 600 kilometers? Is it regional? The shape of the waveforms will tell you a little bit. If it's regional or local, regional, out to about 30, or teleseismic. What's important is if you have a dense network and you have a big teleseismic, most associators will want to form an event underneath the network, because you had incident and you had simultaneous PIC activity at a cluster of stations. By being able to classify them by teleseismic, you can say, don't worry about this PIC. It's not going to form a load. Don't use it. 80% of all our PICs are noise. They cannot be associated. And then if you know if it's a P or an S, that even helps more. And so we are now using in our associator, machine learning PICs that are classified, and it's remarkable how this works. So I'll just show this. If you have a 3-station network and you back propagate a P wave in time, the isochron, there's going to be 4 points at where they intersect. 2 of them are going to intersect here at some point. 2 of the stations will intersect over here. The other pair will intersect here, and all 3 should intersect at one point, and that would be where the event occurred. When you have unclassified PICs, it's ugly. You can see there's many candidates of where this might be. The high point here is where the location is, but it's a vastly simpler problem if you use machine learning PICs. So our original glass 1, for I think a 2-week period, this is what it did, for the same data. So it just shows results. You have earthquakes all over the place, teleseisms coming in, busting up parts of the network. But we had lots of archaic, magical exception rules to get rid of these, to not declare these as real events. But you can see it was a mess. Our new associator, class 3, without machine learning PICs, this is what it looks like. You can see you have to basically get things in Alaska, Western US, this time was induced seismicity, South America, Asia, and the active areas of the Pacific, the rim. When you start using machine learning classified PICs, it vastly improves. Okay, so you can see the associator has very few false event busted or false events. It's pretty much getting them right. And by using the closest 15, we In the Western US, we typically have a solution somewhere between 20 and 40 seconds, depending on where it is. And we'll fully, and by the time it gets to 5 minutes, it's covered the whole of the US. So it's been really important, this. So now we can go fast and we can go accurate, and that changes everything for us. You might ask, well, what happened to class 2? That was a wing over. It basically wing over and did a nosedive into the ground. It happens. So to go faster, we've also changed our procedure. This will be, I'm just showing this display. This is a quick look display. This was a recent event. I don't even know where is it? Papua New Guinea, magnitude 7. You can see the event here. We show the same information that we do on the web. We show details of it. What's the magnitude? You can see the moment magnitude. You can see the mechanism here. The analysts aren't even allowed to change the pick. They can just see the pick on the closest 20 stations, and then they have to hit the publish button. So in this 15-minute time frame, we hope over the next couple of years, we'll go to under 10 minutes and then try and push to 5 for a fully reviewed solution. Okay, so that's the location problem. We solved the magnitude problem by using a W phase method. It's a phase that sits between the P wave and the S wave. It's a mantle propagating wave, so it's very fast. It's just slightly slower than the P waves. But in fact, the way we do it, we use the P wave through the mantle wave to do our mechanisms. So we can do both a grid search in space and depth. And we can do basically any, so we're typically, it's pretty good from about 5.5 to 9 or better. This just shows the raw waveform data for this in the closest 20 stations and fits. And this is just an example of 100 events that we did, 5.7 and larger. And what's important here is we, on average, can do it typically around 7 minutes, get a moment and a style of faulting within about 0.2 of a magnitude unit, showing here. The tails here are probably southern hemisphere ridge events, which are just problematic. It just takes a long time to do it and to get enough stations. So this is how we typically do moment magnitudes now. We're starting to do more and more work. We have a postdoc that was converted to permanent this year who does our finite fault. So if you have a mechanism, you can define a grid along one of the nodal planes, or you operationally, you do both. You come up with subfaults in the subsurface, you know the depth of the event, you grid it up, and you can calculate the slip, the direction of slip, the delay relative to the origin time. So what patches ignited at what time, and the rupture duration, the total rupture duration. And I have no idea what this is. I just stole this from the slide. And this shows the Hoku event. I think it's Tohoku because it's a couple of things. It was up-dip propagation, and it's about 100 seconds long, the source time function. And there just haven't been that many ones recently. So you can see this was the event location. They used the nodal planes for the mechanism, gridded it up, and this was the preferred plane. So it's striking almost north. So yeah, I'm almost sure this was Tohoku. And you can see the slip was mostly up dip. Here, you can see the body waves. They're the fastest. So we start the inversion with the body waves. And you can see the fits are quite good here. And then later on, you keep updating it with the surface waves. So this is purely teleseismic. We can now use INSAR data, GNSS data, and strong motion data in the processing. So what that does is for events like Tohoku, it won't matter because they're too far away. But in places like Turkey, you can get very refined kinematic models by using the close-in data. But how fast you do it is dependent on if you can get access to data. Talk a little bit about impact products. So this has been an ongoing development. The important thing is you need an accurate location and magnitude to get started. If you have a mechanism, that's great. If you don't have that, but you have aftershocks, you can get approximate idea of the source dimension of the events. So you take all this, whether you have aftershocks or a kinematic model, use ground motion prediction equations, reported intensities shown here, and you can construct what is the ground shaking at the surface, and that's a shake map. This is important because it doesn't just shake in a bullseye. This was Northridge. You can see the event was here. It was a blind thrust, and most of the ground shaking was to the north of the epicenter in this. And you can see the distribution of ground shaking throughout the basin. If you have these kinds of maps, you can then superimpose it on the built environment, the population exposed, models of construction practices, and then issues related to their GDP and things like this, time of day. And you can come up with estimates of fatality losses and economic losses. And so we have lots of engineers working on this problem. So, and why are these important? Because it's not the earthquakes that kill people, it's the buildings that kill people. And here's an 8.8 offshore Maui earthquake in 2010. And you can see it's broadly distributed over about 300, 400 kilometers, intense shaking, but because of the building codes, estimates for loss of life are between 100 and 1,000. And in this case, it was closer to the low end, fortunately, but because it's a developed economy, the economic losses are quite high from this because of repairing roads, bridges, and damaged buildings. Significantly smaller event, magnitude 7, shown here in Haiti. It's very near Port-au-Prince. Just note, recently we had the next segment broke with another magnitude 7, but it was a less popular portion. Since this earthquake occurred in 2010, we've been worried if this portion closer to Port-au-Prince is going to rupture. But in fact, this one recently did. Here, it's quite different. Smaller event, but based on shaking and superimposing population exposed construction practices, you can see estimates of loss of life were over 100,000, and that was indeed the case, official estimates. But because of the third world country, cost of replacement costs are significantly off. It's these kinds of maps that are used in the cat bond industry for deciding what they're going to float, how they're going to float them, and other issues. So these have become very important in the business sector. Here's a case of where this was recent in 2018, big Papua New Guinea event on the edge of the highlands of Papua New Guinea. Estimated fatality and losses were less than 100. Economic losses were relatively small because of it being relatively sparse. But if you know anything about the geology, the slope conditions, and other things, you can then do estimates of landslide failure. And so here you can see extreme landslide hazards, exposure to population isn't, it's significant, but not extreme. Likewise, liquefaction was extreme. This becomes important in some way. Bechuan earthquake had huge landslides. Earthquake in Pakistan, India dammed up the river, and the USGS went over and helped them work on relieving the water pressure behind the earth-filled dam. So these models are becoming more and more important for either knowing how the extent of landsliding and liquefaction for emergency response getting in and out of the country, or wondering if they should start looking at photo optical data and other data for damming, landslide dam. So this is a relatively new product. So coming, and one I won't talk about because I don't want Keith shouting at me. We do operational aftershock forecasting. Often it's like, well, what's the likelihood of a big event? And you can see here a generic one for magnitude 7. The probabilities for one of a similar size are relatively small, but each sequence is different. This is coming at some point. We'll have to deal with it. These were based on more California type models. Earthquake behavior in the basin range is quite different, and I don't know how these are going to work. It's something that's being asked more and more of, and we will do more of it. And I'm glad I'm retiring, don't have to deal with it. So I'm going to end like, well, how well did we do in the recent earthquakes? This is another story map that I did with Kevin Furlong and others for the recent Turkey earthquake sequence. If you type Turkey, USGS story map, you can find this. And I'm going to show you the science less than the story map. It was just easy access. So there was on February 6th, there was a magnitude 7.8 right here. It was followed about 9 hours later by 7.5 over here. What was interesting is 2 years earlier, roughly, there was a 6.7 earthquake on this portion of the East Anatolian Fault. And, hindsight being 2020, we now think that these are probably all related. And so just to give you a little bit of background, it's a complicated area. You have the Arabian plate, the African plate, the Eurasian plate, and then you have this thing known as the Anatolian block. Along the south, you have the Cyprus arc, so you have convergent margin, the Hellenic arc. You have the Arabian plate moving north. Relative to this, there's differential motion between the Anatolian block and this, so you end up, the Arabian plate's going about 2 millimeters faster northwards. So you have strike slip system developed along the East Anatolian Fault, but the more known fault is the North Anatolian Fault here, which we know has ruptured almost the entire length of it in the 20th century. So these were quite interesting. One was right down here. What's important is you have the African plate, Arabian plate, and the Anatolian block. So you have a triple junction here. And I'll just show about 15 million years ago, the triple junction was defined by the Dead Sea Fault. Here's the had a triple junction here. And then you have Anatolia here. About 8 million years ago, it moved here. And the triple junction was actually just north of where the 7.8 is. So it likely occurred right in this transition between the Dead Sea Fault and what's known as the East Anatolian Fault. The geologists in the room can argue with me all day. No, it was on one or the other. I'm just going to say it's in the transition. And that's true. And the 7.5 was on an anathetic fault, the Surgu Fault, shown here. So this just shows seismicity, 1900, 2000, 5.5 and larger, shows the location of these events. This is 7 and larger, and you can see the East Anatolian Fault in the 20th century, and it's part of this century, just didn't have any 7s. But most of the famous papers that reported most of the North Anatolian Fault is ruptured in a series of large magnitude 7, the largest being 7.8 here in 1939, earthquake here, and then one near Izmit. This did kill tens of thousands like the Izmit in 1999. So this one's slightly, people were worried about it, but it just really hadn't had a big event. This shows the 2006.7, the mechanism and the aftershock zone of this 2020 event. When we saw it, we just said, oh, it's curious. And then here is the 7.8, orange, or everything between the 7.8 and the 7.5. So roughly 9 hours of seismicity. So earthquakes extended down along the Dead Sea Fault and up towards the 2020 event. And this thing, even though it was not, you could say, well, was your location bad? It should be on the fault. No, it actually started on a secondary fault and immediately ruptured this Dead Sea East Anatolian Fault. And then there was the 7.5 event. Here's its mechanism here. And you can see it's continued. So activity started here, but it's mostly now just staying along this portion. So you see the mechanism, you see the geometry. Here, this is Sentinel data. So this is, you typically see INSAR, but this is pixel tracking data that provides estimates of displacement. So this earthquake, the 7.8 occurred here, the 7.5 occurred about here. You can see this most significant displacement was along the Dead Sea East Anatolian Fault, all the way up to where the area of the 2020 event. And then here was the slip along the 7.5, and you can see the pixel tracking. This stuff came out about a week after. This was done by the geologists. And I just wanted to point this out. Bill Barnhart, who's the author of this paper, he just replaced me when I retired, and he's an expert on remote sensing and INSAR. So for monitoring here, we have in-house capability for weather the earthquakes in the Western US. Globally, we now have somebody who does the remote sensing processing with our secured information facility near in Lakewood. And so this is now something that we're starting to get serious about doing, coming very close to the end. Lessons learned. So you could see how bad we did 20 years ago. So you can see here the 7.8, we had a location and magnitude. We had this out in 12 minutes. We had a location and mechanism and a magnitude in just under 15 minutes. The shake map, automatic shake map comes out pretty quickly. We were just slightly slower on the 7.5. Here 9 hours later, you can imagine with 7.8, there's a lot of noise. There's surface waves keep propagating around the world, and it's a little bit more difficult. So that's why we had to do special processing on the mechanism, but we had an estimate pretty quickly. At 2 hours, we had our shake map and updated pager models. It took several days for us to collect available data for regional data. This is stuff where you could go to an archive and download it. It's not available in real time, so we can improve the finite fault models. And then roughly a week later, the Turks agreed to release the GNSS data, strong motion data, and then we have much improved models. I don't think this is going to be the norm. And certainly in this country, all strong motion, all GNS is available immediately. And so, and all of this, so we're going to be more in this few hours time frame. So I would say we did pretty well on this event. And so you know, there's been a lot of improvements. I have a summary. I think this is going to be more of a reflection. You know, I spent, you know, most of my career in Golden, Colorado, and part of it in Menlo. And I just really want to say, throughout that career, not by choice, but by leadership, this department and the seismograph stations were a huge impact on where NEIC is going, where Southern California is going, and the others. You know, Bob Smith, you know, John Bartley, Dave Chapman, when I was here, were great mentors to people like Kevin Furlong and I, and real cheerleaders through much of our career. So that got us started, you know. And then early in my career, I was tasked to write a congressional report, and Walter Ehrbass was a co-author of that report with a couple other people, and that established the Advanced National Seismic System. Following that, Keith and Chris Pankow have sat on countless working groups trying to improve overall monitoring in the U.S. They not just sat on, they often were main leaders. They've both been incredibly, encouraging to young researchers that I've hired, students that I've hired, their own students, and so they've been real leaders in encouraging, good high quality science. And it's one of the few networks that does good science. Many of them just there to operate, seismic stations. And then Kevin Furlong, who went here, I've mentioned, he and I have worked together for well over 20 years. I think because of a strong influence from Dave Chapman, he came to us and begged us to have an internship program. My very first intern, it was self-serving, was Gavin Hayes. It was the very first intern we ever had 15 years ago. He now runs the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program for the USGS, a $100 million program. We have 40 students coming this summer. It's grown to that. And this fall, Daniel Wells will be a Mendenhall postdoc in Golden, and Alicia Armstrong will be an intern in the summer. We're quite, excited about having them. There's great expectations for them. They'll do well because they were well trained. And so I think, not because I staked it out, but there's been this thread through my whole career of leadership by this department and by this seismic network. And, I think one of the problems we have right now is there just aren't very many people that are good at seismic monitoring. And this school is turning out some of the best. And, that makes a difference for other networks, and it's going to make a difference for NEIC and the path forward. So, I'm glad to come here. I didn't have to do much to help them. They were already ahead of me most of my career, but, I appreciate everything that this department did over my 32-year career. The students I've had from here, the insights that they've given me, helped me when we needed help. And in kind, when you have earthquakes like the Magna earthquake, the Crandall Canyon mine, I would call up and say, what do you need? And we would provide it. And so it's been a very supportive relationship. And we're making huge progress. And I think we can make even more progress with the students that are coming out of here. So that's it. That's